What's good, family? What's good? This is another installment of the HBCU Fanatics. You know what it is. Shout out to the mighty LDBC. Of course, I have Mr. Southern, my co-host, on with me. Coach 67 Sports TV, what's going on?
Man, I'm blessed and highly favored. Hoping all is well with you. And of course, the fanatics, we back in the build down, you dig. Shout out to the awesome and amazing LDBC. This is season 1, episode 1, HBCU Fanatics. Now I know some of y'all gonna be like, man, Coach, y'all done a bunch of episodes of HBCU Fanatics, but it's official. We done moved it over to my brother channel. Of course, we done a few episodes on this channel. However, in terms of starting off the season on the right note, season 1, episode 1, we're gonna preview the SWAC MEAC challenge. I know a lot of people like, no, coach, it's the MEAC SWAC challenge. No. The SWAC should be first, you know what I'm saying? So the SWAC MEAC challenge, kickoff weekend, week 0, you know what I'm saying? Let's get it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Y'all know what it is, man. It's a week 0. We finally got football. And I'm excited, Coach. Man, it's a damn good matchup. We're gonna see if your Southern Jaguars, how they fare against one of the better teams in the MEAC, the North Carolina Central Eagles, coached by Trey Oliver. Now,
Former Southern University defensive coordinator.
former Southern Jaguar offensive coordinator, yes, and
Defensive
also
coordinator.
defensive. Thank you,
Yeah.
defense, and also they got another coach that used to be a former Jag, Coach Matt Leone. I think Coach Trey Oliver brought him over there
Yeah, he did.
with him because he was 16 through 2016 and 18. He was a safeties coach. So yeah, that's about the same time Coach Trey Oliver made the transition. So a lot of people a lot of Eagles fans are saying, okay, we got some former Jags, so they think they know y'all system or how y'all operate. So it's gonna be very interesting. Today's show, we just gonna me personally, I believe the Eagles have a great chance of winning. May even blow this game wide open if the Jaguars are not careful. Coach, before we go into detail, Coach, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I'll be lying if I said that North Carolina Central is not the favorite. North Carolina Central is the favorite. However, Southern is 4-0 in SWAC MEAC challenges. And in addition to that, the SWAC has won the last 4 SWAC MEAC challenges. So, I think, of course, really and truly, that really don't mean nothing. But at the end of the day, I think North Carolina Central is the favorite for, this game on Saturday, 6:30 ABC. I think they're the favorite for a reason,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And they got a lot of returning factors, man. They got, of course, their quarterback Walker Harris on the opposite side of the ball. They got their one of his favorite targets, Luke Bracey, the tight end on that offensive line. They got 2 pieces, mainly pieces returning Trayvon Humphrey and Noah McKinney. And then during the MEAC media day, Walker Harris was bragging about his wide receivers, his tall wide receivers, Chauncey Spike, 6'2", 210, and Quentin McCall, who is 6'4", 200. And in the slot, he has 5'8", Chance Peterson, and then Mekhi Wall, who's also on the shorter side. And Quick Markel, or Markel Quick, excuse me, who's also on the shorter side, like that slot receiver. So they got a lot of players coming back that's familiar with the offense. So Coach Trey Oliver is gonna, lean on those kids to make sure, they try to dominate this year. what's going on at Southern? What pieces
Well,
y'all got returning? Now, of course, you got that boy Holly from LSU transfer, which I'm excited for you, and you're definitely excited. But what the Jaguars cooking up to try to stop the Eagles?
I'm gonna talk about every phase of Southern's team, but let's go with North Carolina Central's offense, they got 9 returning starters, and they were pretty potent offensively, so they confident with that. And of course, Trey Oliver, realistically, the brand of football he likes to play, that physical smash mouth brand of football. I think he really kind of got that when he was at Southern. But they got nine starters returning on the offensive side of the ball and matching up against Southern defense. Of course, they got Kelby Givens. Kelby Givens is that guy. SWAC co-defensive player of the year. Reigning
Hmm.
SWAC co-defensive player of the year. And in addition to that, this is the second year in a row he's been preseason SWAC defensive player of the year. So, Kelby Givens, you definitely going to have to account for him. But, some Southern detractors and some North Carolina Central fans and just some Southern University all around haters, they've been saying, hey, Southern, 3 of their starters on their defensive line, minus Kelby Givens. Like they're missing 3 starters. So, how that defensive line gonna match up against North Carolina Central, especially with their physical brand of play. But this is the thing. First and foremost, you got Kelby Givens. You're gonna have to account for him. You're gonna have to double him. You're gonna have to chip him. You're gonna have to run right at him. You're gonna have to run away from him. You're gonna have to maybe sometimes run zone read option and not block him. Teams have done all of these things, and he still wreaked havoc all throughout the season last year. So you definitely got to account for him. But the thing about it is, Southern's defense has carried in the last few years. And on the defensive line, they've replaced Taj Brown. They replaced Jordan Lewis. They replaced uh, Jason Dumas. So I don't think they're going to have a problem replacing Davin Cotton at defensive tackle, Big Willie Miles at defensive tackle, who had the viral fumble recovery against UAPB to clinch the SWAC West, and Darius Harry. So I don't think they should have a problem replacing the 3 of them. And then, of course, on the next level, you got Vincent Page Jr., preseason second team all SWAC. I'm not gonna lie, Vince Page, he kind of reminds me of a former Southern University linebacker / defensive end named Vince Lance. Of course, Vince Page, he kind of reminds me of Kenny Peebles, LaShawn Kenny Peebles, because now he wants to be called Vince Sullivan. I don't know where this comes from, but Southern had this running back years ago named LaShawn Kenneth Peebles. Kenneth was his middle name. LaShawn was his first name. So he was called Kenny Peebles for like 2-3 years. And then the last year, he was like, hey, I don't want y'all to call me Kenneth Peebles anymore. I want y'all to call me LaShawn Peebles. Kenneth is my middle name. LaShawn is my first name. And I'm like, bro, why you didn't just say that from the outset? You know what I'm saying? But that's neither here nor there. But, you know,
Right.
Vince Sullivan, he a dog. Many members of Jaguar Nation felt like he should have at least made second team all SWAC last year. And then, of course, he's finally healthy now. The other linebacker, Mike Jones. Mike Jones, a dog. He's been talked about a lot, but the issue is he's never been able to stay healthy. He's finally healthy. So on that next level, you got Vince Page Jr. and you got Mike Jones. But Southern really makes their bones in that secondary. You got that dude, Herman Bristol III.
Hmm.
He's good in coverage. He's a ball hawk. And of course, you saw what he did in the Bayou Classic, smacking Grambling wide receiver. Of course, he got ejected from the game. He had to miss part of the SWAC championship game. So, Herman Bristol III, he kind of remind me of the late great Sean Wallace. Of course, Southern has dedicated the 2025 season to Sean Wallace. But in
You know,
terms of him being,
I like how Herman Brewster play.
yeah, Hammer Bristol, like I said, he makes plays on the back end, kind of like Corian Harris did in the secondary. But he's a ball hawk and he makes plays around the line of scrimmage when necessary. And then of course the other safety, you got Horatio Johnson. Horatio Johnson, he another one, he a dog. He a senior. He definitely leading that secondary. So Of course, the other DB that they're really talking about a lot is Elijah West. Elijah West, they think he's gonna do big things in the slot this year. So Southern has some foundational players that they building their defense around. Southern defense has carried them the last 2 years. They fly around, they fast, they physical. Now there were points in the season last year where teams were able to just line up and just jam the ball down their throat. But they're hoping that LSU transfer defensive tackle Demarion Johnson. They think he gonna do big things, and he gonna help like anchor Southern University's run defense. So it's gonna be interesting to see how North Carolina Central's offense matches up against Southern defense. North Carolina Central's offense is a strength, and Southern's defense is the strength. So you're going strength on strength. So it's gonna be interesting to see how that matchup plays out. But Southern has had a good defense the last few years. Some people think it's gonna take them a while to really, gel together and find their chemistry. But even last year, with all the starters they had to replace, they still was flying around making it happen. So I think they're gonna do what they do defensively.
Yeah, Southern's defense always been solid, even though the offense a lot of times been stuck in the mud and causing that defense to be out there so long they eventually be scored on. But yeah, the Southern's defense always been solid. Now speaking of defense, talk to you some key players on the Eagles, North Carolina Central's defense. Defensive back Malcolm Reed, he's returning. Uh, Defensive back Jelani Vassell, defensive back Eric Adams. Those are three defensive backs you need to look out for, or Southern needs to watch out for. They're the more experienced defensive backs in that secondary. On the D line, of course, you have Christian Smith and Thomas Johnson. Them two are dogs, man. They will hunt and eat. Now, the linebacker core, of course, you have the leader, one of the captains, Max Urine, which I had the privilege of seeing him play against my Tar Heels. And he played good. He played good. I mean, in my opinion, even though they lost, he popped out on the tape, and you know what I mean, Coach. Um, but yeah, those defensive players on North Carolina Central are, in my opinion, going to help the Eagles win the game. I'm just going to go ahead and say it, Coach. I'm really going toward the Eagles. Uh, Not because of the dominance they've been for a couple of years, except last year, of course, in the MEAC. But I just feel like they have a lot too many pieces, experienced pieces on the offense and defense side of the ball, um, to overcome the Jags.
Well, the thing about Southern offensively, Southern is returning of the offensive linemen. 45 starters from last year is returning. So Southern has four starting offensive linemen returning. Now the left top tackle spot, is still kind of up in the air. They got a freshman who won the state championship with the Zachary Broncos, not too far from Southern. He could potentially start as a true freshman, or they got a transfer from PV that could potentially start. We don't know who's going to be the starting left tackle, but they're going to have a new starter at left tackle, but you got four returning starters on the offensive line. I think that's going to be major. Southern's offensive line got a lot of criticism. Myself as a former offensive lineman, even though people look at me, they're like, man, Coach, you on the 5'7", you play on the offensive line? Yeah, I did. But even with that being said, many people feel like in the big games that Southern's offensive line really didn't deliver. They struggled early in the year against McNeese. A game that they led like 85% of the game. They came back and lost that game. They struggled in that game. But around maybe that Texas Southern game, he finally rearranged the starting offensive line. He moved players around, this, that, and the third. And after that point, like Southern, they rushed for at least 120 yards the rest of the season. So Southern offensive line, as the season progressed, they got better. They gel together. They find their chemistry. Led by Juan Gonzalez. He transferred from Nice. You know, and so Southern offensive line, you got some veterans returning. Now, many people think, you know, based on the quarterback play of the last few years, last year Noah Biden, as AT said, the year before Harold Blood, and the year before that Bashawn McCray. Many people think all you got to do is just load up the box and take away Southern running game, and that's you just gonna shut Southern down. But that's really not the case. The reason being is because Jalen Woods late in the season, I felt like Coach Graves stuck with Noah Barton too long in the McNeese game, and even against Savannah State, and then he pulled him, and Zay came in and they won that game. Zay got hurt against Jackson State. Then Noah came back, and they kept flip-flopping between the two of them. Instead of giving Jalen Woods a chance, they really didn't give him a chance until they was trailing in the Bethune-Cookman game, and he brought him back, and they won that game in 5 overtimes. So he brought him back, led him to a win against Bethune-Cookman. Then they clinched the SWAC West against UAPB, and then he led him to a win in the Bayou Classic. However, he got a concussion in the Bayou Classic, and he didn't play in the SWAC championship game. So, as a Southern University fan, I'm confident in Jalen Woods as a starting quarterback. For people that think all you got to do is load up the box and you're going to stop Southern's running game and that's it, and they can't beat you passing the ball. Jalen Woods, he's a pure pocket passer. He goes through his progression quickly. He makes quick reads. He throws a good, quick, catchable pass. So I think people sleeping on Jalen Woods. I'm confident if he can stay healthy throughout the duration of the season, I think he's going to make at least second team all SWAC, in my personal opinion. Some people saying I'm reaching, but, that's my personal opinion. And so you got the line play, you got the quarterback. And, many people feel like Jackson State, transfer Cameron McCoy. They really believe and feel that he's a better fit for Mark Frederick's system, and they feel like former Southern University offensive coordinator Mark Orlando, they feel like, Jalen Woods would have been a better fit for Mark Orlando's spread system back in the day, but they feel like, Mark Frederick, he wants that running quarterback, that dual threat quarterback, that's a good athlete. I'm not gonna say Bashawn McCray, because Bashawn McCray really couldn't pass the ball, but more like Ladarius Skelton, and I'll probably, if I had to compare Cameron McCoy to anybody, I'll probably compare him to former Southern University starting quarterback Ladarius Skelton. I think he kind of reminds me a lot of him. But even with that being said, I'm confident in Jalen Woods. More than likely, they're going to have a package for Cameron McCoy, but I think at this point, Jalen Woods has clearly separated himself as being Southern University's starting quarterback. He's going to be the guy. Hopefully he can stay healthy, but they definitely going to have a package for Cameron McCoy. But I think the thing that's going to take Southern University to the next level is the running backs. The man running back you talked about earlier in particular is Trey Holly, former LSU running back, is a high school running back. He has the Louisiana high school state football record for high school football players in terms of rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. He broke Nick Bursett's record, who was he was a starting running back at LSU at one point, and he went to LSU's feeder school, University Lab. And the reason why I bring that up is because Nick Bursett, he was a starting running back, varsity running back as an 8th grader, and that's the reason why he had so many running back records, because he started from 5 years in high school as opposed to 4. And for Trey Holly to break those records, Trey Holly was an extremely explosive, high school player coming out of Union Parish. Ended up going to LSU his freshman year. You know, he played in like 4 games. He had a huge game against Army, but he had an unfortunate incident when he went back home to Union Parish. Uh, you know, he was charged with attempted murder, but the thing about it is the grand jury didn't even convict him, and is a many people believe is a case of mistaken identity. So he had to sit out his whole sophomore year. He redshirted because LSU has a policy that they can't have players with pending felony charges, on the active roster. So he didn't want to sit out a second season in a row, so he transferred to Southern, and he's been ripping off long runs. And many people say he's not even in game shape, but for him to rip off the long runs he been ripping off and juking people and making plays he's been making, that goes to show you if he's playing this way, he's not even in shape. Imagine once he actually gets in game shape. But many people feel like the bell cow running back because Mark Frederick and Terrence Graves, Coach Graves, they're gonna play running back by committee like they did last year with Kendrick Grimes, C.J. Russ, and Kobe Dillon. But Mike Franklin, he a graduate player. He played at UTEP. He transferred from Jacksonville State. He's the big, strong, physical, power running back. He probably gonna get most of the touches, but Southern has 8 running backs. Uh, they had uh, Jason Gabriel, who came from John Curtis, which is a Louisiana powerhouse, and they also have Barry Remo, who came from Catholic High, and he won a state championship there. So, you know, and not only that, but they have Southern University Laboratory running back, Amarian Asbury, Double A. So Southern has a loaded running back room. They go 8 deep at the running back position. They're gonna play a lot of backs. Probably gonna have like a 3-back rotation like they did last year. So I think, having dynamic playmakers at the running back position, like Trey Holly, like Princeton Cahey, Louisiana Tech transfer, Barry Remo, Jason Gabriel. They loaded. For the most part, all of Southern University's running backs are traditional Southern University running backs. What I mean by that is they like third down, smallish, like jittery bug type running backs. Juke you, fast, speed. Like the Kendrick Grimes. But I think the reason why Mike Franklin is such a big deal is because he kind of give you that Gerard Sims, Lionel Nicholas, Steele Adams. He's the big physical, strong power back that's gonna give you the change of pace. Many people believe that uh that Mike Franklin, and Cameron McCoy, from a quarterback and running back standpoint, they're the best fit for Coach Mark Frederick's system because all he want to do is run the ball, run the ball, run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. He'll pass the ball if he has to, but he primarily wants to run it. But from a traditional standpoint, uh, Jalen Woods is more of Southern University's traditional quarterback, whereas Trey Holly, man, Pete Richardson would have lost his mind if he had a running back like Trey Holly back in the gap. And he would have probably would have ran him about 30 times a game. Easy. So I think that's an area of strength. Their running back room. Their quarterback room is the best it's been in years. And even with the wide receiving core, they have Darren Morris, who's returning. He's a senior. I think he's going to lead that group. You got Kobe Brown, who went to St. James. He was a dog at St. James. St. James is another Louisiana powerhouse in my local area. You got him. You got Malachi Sticks Jackson, JUCO transfer. And, Southern, I think, they don't have a loaded wide receiving core like some of the other, teams in the SWAC and MEAC. But I think they got a solid core, you know what I'm saying? And they really gonna surprise people, in my personal opinion. Now, of course, Southern primarily wants to run the ball, but if you think you're just gonna load up the box and just take away Southern's running game, I think you're sadly mistaken. I think Jalen Woods and the wide receiver core gonna shock a lot of people, but of course, center stage is gonna be Trey Holly and Mike Franklin, from a running back standpoint.
Okay, coach, and thank you for that in-depth view. Now, speaking of running backs, one of the things I will pay attention to is that running back room. How the running backs for North Carolina Central are going to pan out, especially with that workhorse Jamari Taylor, no longer with the team, or I think he graduated. Um, Players like Arthur Rogers Jr., who's more like their bruiser back, a power back, and returning senior Chris Mosley, who shared who shared some of the carries with Jamari Taylor. Chris Mosley now is the going to be the feature back, him being the speed back. Um, so uh, so with Jamari Taylor not no longer there, him getting most of the the carries, like I said, the workhorse. Uh, uh, they're gonna have to lean on Chris Mosley and Arthur Rogers Jr. To me, I think Arthur Rogers Jr. is going to be this year. He's gonna see a lot of carries. Him being the bruiser, the more the bruiser of the backs and their running back room. Now, who I do want to see, me being originally from North Carolina, is that young boy LeBron Sharp from Havelock, North Carolina. Havelock being a one of the powerhouses in North Carolina in 4A, but I think they moved up to 5A this year. But anywho, they're a powerhouse in North Carolina. Him being in that program and being a wonderful back for the Havelock Rams, uh, and him being a freshman, it's gonna. They don't be surprised if you see him on the field, Coach.
Okay, I mean, honestly, I think if I was playing against Southern's defense, Southern, they're synonymous for real good pass rushers like, Trey Lane, Jordan Lewis, Kelby Gibbons. So, Taj Brown. Well, Taj Brown played nose guard and defensive end. In back-to-back years, he made second team all SWAC. So that going to show you his type of versatility for him to be moved from a one technique to a 5 or a wide 9 and still be productive. But I think Southern, if they're vulnerable in any area, like I said earlier, is that running game. If I was them, I would try to run the ball. I don't think you're going to – I'm not saying they're not going to be able to pass the ball on Southern at all, but I think Southern's ability to rush the passer in Southern secondary is the strength of their team. I think they're most susceptible to the run. That's where teams really tried to attack Southern last season in terms of, going against Southern's defenses. You want to try to pound the ball on them.
Yeah, they got the backs to do it. It's just that like I said, Jamari Taylor's no longer there, so they're gonna lean on backs that really didn't get a lot of snaps. Um, because Jamari Taylor was getting most of them. So it's definitely a question mark to see who's going to step up.
Yeah, and one thing I want to point out too in terms of Southern's offense, Southern, they go 8 deep in the running back room. The quarterback room is the best it's been in years. But one thing I didn't point out, Southern's tight end Dupree Fuller, he made. I ain't gonna lie, because I always want to call him Fuller Dupree. To me, Fuller Dupree sounds, more adequate than Dupree Fuller. But Dupree Fuller, he was a target last year. I'm not gonna lie, Noah leaned on him. Zay leaned on him. Jalen Woods went to him. And not only that, but they have Minor at tight end also. So Southern goes about, 4 deep at tight end, but those two, in terms of Fuller and Minor, like they really some good tight ends. So it's gonna be interesting to see if Coach Mark Frederick, if he only plays one tight end at a time, or at any point he goes with a 2 tight end package. Of course, the Southern they deep from a wide receiving standpoint also, But if you go full deep at wide receiver, I mean, if you go full deep at tight end, at some point, I'm sure you won't play more than one tight end. I mean, I don't know what type of package he's gonna use, and that's one of the, I say, another weakness of Southern team. I'm not gonna lie. Like Mark Frederick, he wants to run the ball. He wants to run zone read or read option about 45 times a game. But his play calling, I ain't gonna lie, is questionable. The offense is extremely vanilla. You know, Nowadays with spread teams, they like to run motion and they kind of like window dress and give you different looks. And from a play calling standpoint, they like the scaffold where, hey, if I run read option, read option, read option, I won't pull it and maybe like throw like a tunnel screen off it. And then off the tunnel screen, maybe later on I want to throw the ball deep down the field. But for the most part, Southern's offense is extremely bland and extremely vanilla. It's you really don't make the defense do a lot of guessing, a lot of thinking. It's just, hey, we just gonna play bully ball and we're gonna line up and punch in them out. And that's one thing they struggle with when they stepped up in competition. Many people feel like, North Carolina Central, they're one of the better teams in HBCU football. And anytime Southern stepped up in competition, whether it was,
They are,
against,
yeah.
whether it's against FAMU, whether it was against Jackson State, even out of conference with Nicholls State, who Nicholls State wasn't all that good. They were good the year before, but they didn't like the world on fire last year. And even with McNeese State, Southern has never beat McNeese State. McNeese State, from a PWI standpoint, they traditionally, them and Southern is on about the same level. But Southern has never beat McNeese State. And really the last two times Southern played them, Southern had like like they were in control of both of those games the last two times they played McNeese. And they
Hmm.
came away with losses in both of those games. So many people feel like, you know, part of the reason why they're not as high on Southern is because when Southern step up to the big leagues, whether it's McNeese State, Nicholls State, in terms of PWIs, or whether they play Jackson State or FAMU, or maybe even a MEAC team, they feel like Southern can't get the job done. So I think that's why a lot of people are picking North Carolina Central to win this particular game. But I honestly believe Southern going to surprise a lot of people Saturday.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking to be a good game, man. Definitely looking to be a good game. All right. Um, we're gonna go into our X factors. We're gonna pick two X factors from both sides of the ball, and we're gonna wrap everything up, Coach.
Well, well, well. Before we get to that, bro, let me throw this in that. You know,
Please, please.
of course, I already talked about how you know Southern, they 4-0 in a SWAC MEAC challenge, and the SWAC is one of the last four. But one other thing I want to point out too is the reason why a lot of people leaning towards North Carolina Central. North Carolina Central is, they're a good team from a special team standpoint. And I'm not gonna lie, from a special team standpoint, Southern is they're kind of sketchy. Like year before last, they had their
Yes.
partner named Mr. Goldenfoot Ruben Beauplants. And that year before last with Harold Blood, because Harold Blood had a excellent receiving core with August Petrie the third and Cassius Allen and Jalen Howard and Chandler Whitfield and Darren Morris, who's the top receiver coming in this year. He was the fifth receiver that year. So that shows you how good their receiving core was. But Southern was loaded at wide receiver. You had, some good running backs. You had Kendrick Grimes. But, Harold Blood left a lot to be desired from a quarterback standpoint. But the defense and special teams carried Southern, primarily Southern punter, Mr. Goldenfoot, Ruben Beauplants. In many instances, Southern would be pinned deep, and Ruben Beauplants would come on the field, and he would punt the ball, and he would pin opposing offense on their own end, and Southern's defense just did what they did. So it was a real asset from a punting standpoint. And then, of course, you had Joshua Griffin. I think Joshua Griffin was a good kicker, but the issue is I think he had, a stronger leg than pretty much almost any kick I saw come through Southern, but he was not as accurate as somebody like Carlos Leach, and he was very inconsistent. But from a punt standpoint, going back to Ruben Beauplants last year, year before last, he graduated. He was a grad student or whatever. And last year, Alcorn State punter, backup punter, Kenny Lee Pham, he transferred to Southern. And I'm not gonna lie, it was a real area of weakness for Southern. Many instances he would come on the field, he would punt the ball, give you a 29-yard punt, give you a 30-yard punt, a 33, 34, 35-yard punt. So he left a lot to be desired from a punt standpoint. So if North Carolina Central excels from a special team standpoint, I'm not gonna lie, you lost Joshua Griffin. He graduated. Kenny Lee Pham. Hopefully, they said, people has been telling me behind the scenes, and they been saying it in my comment section on my channel that, he's been going to a lot of punting camps. He really been working on his game. So hopefully he's greatly improved and vastly improved, because I'm not gonna lie, last year I saw why he had to transfer from Alcorn State, because he left a lot to be desired. And I'm just kind of being nice about the situation. What I would ordinarily say, but he wasn't good, to say the least. So that's an area of weakness for Southern. Hopefully he's improved, because this the crazy thing about it. I heard, a few weeks ago, like when they first got in camp or whatever, that Coach Terrence Graves, he was trying to, bring in another punter. So the fact that he was trying to bring in another punter, that tells you everything you need to know. Because even in all these scrimmages and stuff, going back to the spring game, because at least year before last, like they actually had special teams in that spring game. This past spring game, 2025 Blue versus Gold spring game, there was no special teams at all, bro. So the fact that they had no special teams, that tells you everything you need to know in terms of, you know, special teams is a area of weakness for Southern. Now they brought in another kicker. They got a true freshman kicker from Central High School. Of course, I used to live in Central. Central is an area in Baton Rouge, between EBR and Livingston Parish. And, from what I understand, he played soccer, but he's been kicking his whole life. His name is Nathan Zimmer. I talked about him on my channel in a video or whatever. But, from what I'm hearing, I've been hearing good things about Nathan Zimmer in terms of him being able to kick the ball off deep, and him having like, is a true freshman, him having like 40 plus yard. He can make kicks of 40 plus yards right now as a true freshman. So I think he gonna be straight, but it's gonna be interesting to see how it plays out, because, like I said, Joshua Griffin graduated. Now you bring in the true freshman, so it's gonna be interesting to see. How he pans out. But I think the biggest area I'm concerned about, well, I'm not gonna say the biggest area from a special team standpoint. The biggest area is the punter. Hopefully, Kenny Lee family improve. But another thing, like Southern has had some very good punt returners over the years. They've had guys like, uh, Willie Quinn, Ezra Landry, Kenyatta Sparks, Fred Bailey, Danny Johnson. They've had some great punt and kick returners. Southern hasn't had one like that in a long time. And Southern needs to find them a dynamic, elite level punt and kick returner. Kind of the way Jackson State has Travis Terrell Jr. So Southern needs to find them a dynamic punt and kick returner. And that's the thing about it. Even that game in Lake Charles last year against McNeese, them getting a field goal blocked is what changed the tide of the game and swung things in McNeese State direction. And Kenny Lee Pham poor punting, it was just the icing on the cake that pretty much, you know, allowed Southern to blow a game that they was leading like 85% of the game, but they could never really pull away. And since McNeese State was in striking distance, once they blocked that field goal, like it changed that game tremendously, and it gave McNeese State all the momentum, and that's what ended up it helped lead to Southern's loss. So I think at the end of the day, I think that's going to be a huge component in this game from the standpoint of, at times Southern is weak from a special team standpoint, and North Carolina Central is a strength of theirs.
Yeah, special teams is a strength, especially in punt return. Now, I will say they got a. I'm not sure if they have another punter or kicker on the roster. The only punter and kicker I see is this young man, freshman named Caleb Robeson. So that's going to be interesting, but we gonna see. But two X factors from both the offense and the defensive side of the ball. Um, so, coach, for your Jaguars, starting with offense, pick two players you think that needs to play good against North Carolina Central, and same thing with the defense.
I think offensively, I'm gonna go with Jalen Woods at the quarterback position,
Of course.
and I'm gonna go with Trey Holly at the running back position. Even though I think Mike Franklin is gonna get the bulk of the carries, I think you need Trey Holly to come in and get you some big plays in terms of explosive plays, 20, 25, 30-yard run. Even if they say he's not in game shape, if he could give you 5 carries for it give you like maybe 3 or 4 20-yard runs, I think that'll help him a long way. And then of course, I wouldn't be surprised if North Carolina Central just tried to load up the box. And if they just try to load up the box, I think Jalen Woods in a receiving core, Dupree Fuller and Darren Morris and Malachi Sticks Jackson and Kobe Brown, they're gonna have to make plays in the passing game, to keep teams this season just from loading up the box and try to stop Mike Franklin and Trey Holly and Princeton Cahee and Amari Nasbury and Barry Remo and Jason Gabriel. They're gonna have to do something to just keep teams just from loading up the box.
Right.
And now from a defensive standpoint, of course, Kelby Givens, I think
Mm-hmm.
he has to be the same disruptive force that he was the entire season last year. The way he started off the season, because people don't realize the year before he wore number 92, and last year he wore number 1. And I'm like, man, where Kelby Givens? I don't see 92. But I kept seeing his number 1 making all these plays. And then I'm like, oh, then later on he's like, oh man, he changed his number 1. I say that makes sense because he making a lot. So, of course he's gonna have to be the guy that he's always been, especially last year, he just was, dominant. So he's
Right.
gonna have to play great defensively. And then from the defensive side, uh, I expect Herman Brisset III to be what he's gonna be. I
Mm.
expect Horatio Johnson to be what he's gonna be. I expect Vincent Page Jr. to be what he's gonna be. So I'm looking for a big game from Elijah West, in a secondary. So
Okay.
defensively, I'm gonna say Elijah West and Kelby Givens. Offensively, I'm gonna say Jalen Woods and Trey Holly.
All right. All right. Okay. So for the offensive side, of course I'm gonna pick Walker. Walker Harris has to play good. This young man, especially in the MEAC media day, he even said he has to be more consistent. He just can't play like an all-star first half and second half be mediocre. So Walker Harris is putting everything on his back that he has to play better. So of course Walker Harris, and then um, I was gonna go running back. Or I'm gonna actually go wide receiver. Quentin McCall, 6'4", 200, wide receiver, definitely has to play well. Um, he has to definitely make the tough catches in that stingy Southern secondary. So um, definitely looking at him for him to ball out. Now on the defensive side of the ball, they captain Max Urin need to make sure he's sharp. Make sure he doesn't take a step backwards. Um, he continues to be consistently the leader of that defense. And then I'm gonna go deep. I was gonna do defensive back Michael Reed, but me being a former defensive lineman, I'm gonna go Christian Smith. Christian Smith has to show dominance against that Southern Jaguars offensive line. So those are my two.
All right. So in terms of matchup, like Southern's defense against North Carolina Central's offense, North Carolina Central's defense against Southern offense, what you think is going to be the real dog fight between the two teams in terms
Oh,
of
you know it, coach. You being
what it?
offensive line BD, you know the trenches, man.
Oh yeah. That's definitely going to be huge. I always feel like when Southern was in their heyday, they were dominant up front on both sides of the ball. But I'm talking about in terms of course, you and I were both linemen, so we both played in the trenches. I think that's going to be a key vital matchup. But I'm talking about in terms of like one side of the ball versus the other side of the ball. What you think is going to be the real matchup to watch? Southern's defense against North Carolina Central offense, North Carolina Central's defense against Southern offense. What you think is going to be like the real dog fight?
Central's offense versus so people like uh Trevon Humphrey and Noah McKinney, how he does against that Southern front, like Kelby Givens and the other players, man. So
Damarian Johnson.
Jamari Johnson, yeah, and just to see how if they continue to be dominant, um, or just to watch that chess match in the trenches.
Yeah, and that's the thing about it. When the season ended, defensive coordinator Henry Miller, he felt like the safety, in terms of getting more defensive backs, he brought in more defensive backs, but he felt like defensive tackle, with Willie Miles leaving, and Davin Cotton, Davin Cotton also transferred from LSU too. He was a starting defensive tackle last year. So he felt like that was an area of weakness. Southern brought in a lot of defensive tackles because, stopping the run was an issue last year. So, I think it's going to be imperative that, Southern up front, like you say, defensively, minus Kelvin Givens, that, those defensive linemen up front, that they take care of business. And from what I'm understanding, Coach Henry Miller, he's going to try to rotate a lot of, minus, for the exception of Kelvin Givens, from what I'm understanding, he's going to try to rotate a lot of like different defensive linemen in and out the game. But it's going to be interesting to see, if Damarian Johnson, defensive tackle, transfer from LSU, how much of an impact he's going to have, because, one person told me he's not even going to be starting. And then somebody else told me that, like, Southern University defensive line coach, DeMarcus Miller, like, he was the best nose guard / defensive tackle I've seen come through Southern. I mean, he was only like 5'10", like 275, 285, but he was a wrecking ball, and he was unblockable. Some people saying Damarian Johnson gonna be that good. So it's gonna be interesting to see if he's overhyped, because on one end of the spectrum they're saying, hey, he could be the best defensive tackle Southern has seen in a long time. And on the other end of the spectrum, somebody told me he's not even going to be starting. So it's going to be interesting to see, is it somewhere in the middle, or is it on one end of the spectrum or the other end of the spectrum? So time going to tell. We're going to see. But Southern did bring in another defensive tackle, I guess, to give them some depth. And not only that, but from what I'm understanding, they also got another quarterback, because, they already have Jalen Woods, the returning. You got Cameron McCoy, who transferred from Jackson State. You got Dylan Compton, who went to Bunkie High School. He's a true freshman. But from what I'm understanding, they needed some more quarterback depth. And they got another quarterback that transferred from LSU, to add depth. But from what I'm understanding, he not ready yet. He don't know the offense. He just coming in. So they needed a fourth quarterback to add some quarterback depth,
Okay. Well, Coach, I cannot wait, man. So, what time the game comes on for the people just listening or just hearing about the game and want to watch it?
It comes on ABC at 6:30 on Saturday, week 0. The spotlight is going to be on Southern and North Carolina Central, because
In the HBCU world, yes, sir.
in the HBCU world, because it's going to be the only real game in town. So it's going to be, all eyes going to be on them. So it's going to be interesting to see. And of course, I can't let you off the hook like that. What's your prediction for the game? Who you got winning? Final score, whatever.
I got North Carolina Central winning 31-14.
All right. Well, of course, many people say I'm definitely a Southern University graduate. No two ways about it. But a lot of people say I'm a Southern University homer. I always pick Southern. That's not true, because if you go look on my channel, Last year when they played against Nickel State, I picked Nickel State. So we can't say I'm always gonna be honest. I'm always gonna keep it real. A lot of these Jackson State fans feel like I lie to my subscribers and my fan base just to keep them happy. But I'm gonna keep it a buck. I got Southern winning 28-24. I think it's gonna be
Okay, I
a
can
close
actually
game.
see that's actually possible. It depends on Southern, but go ahead, Coach.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be a dog fight. I think it's gonna be physical. I think both teams are going. I think it's gonna be some momentum shifts. It's gonna be some change in tide and change in momentum during the course of the game. But I think the team that's gonna come out on top is gonna have some mental toughness. They're gonna have to be able to overcome adversity. And the thing about it, this is a must-win game for Southern, in my personal opinion, because members of Jaguar Nation like myself, we have extremely high expectations for the team. Many people feel like Southern is overhyped, but I said this at the beginning of last season, and I think the same thing holds true this season. Southern's early schedule, even though all the big games are at home, with Alabama State and Jackson State and Prairie View and FAMU. Of course, they go play Alcorn State and Longman, Mississippi again. But even with that being said, it's going to be imperative that Southern starts the season off on a good foot, because after that you got to go play Mississippi Valley. I don't think Mississippi Valley is going to be Southern, but I think Valley going to be a lot tougher than a lot of people think. And
I think so too.
not only that, but I mean, you got Alabama State, you got Jackson State, you got like a tough schedule. Even though all your big games at home, you play a lot of tough games early in the season, and then you got to go to Fresno State, and you got to play Fresno State at Fresno State. So I think if Southern struggles early and they drop a few games, many Southern detractors and naysayers and Southern University haters, they think Southern is going to start out like 1-5, 1-6. Whereas myself, I think Southern going to start out 5-1, 6-1, and I think the only early loss they're going to have is against Fresno State. So I think it's imperative that Southern University wins Saturday, because I'm not gonna lie, I'm gonna keep it a buck. Jaguar Nation, we have high expectations, and if Southern lose, a few games early, if they start out like 1-4, 1-5, 1-6, it could get real ugly for Coach Graves. So I think it's imperative that Southern University starts off on the right foot. They start off on a good note, and they get the season, start the season off with a bang. They start strong, they surge in the middle, and they finish strong. And, if the law says the same, I'm not going to be able to make the game Saturday. But when they make it to Atlanta at the end of the season for the Celebration Bowl, I plan on being in the building. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And yeah, man. Trey. Speaking of you saying Coach Trey Oliver, if he has another season like last year, probably not next year, but in a couple of years, he may be also on the hot seat as well.
I'm gonna be honest with you. I think he's, more secure in his position. Just think about it. They beat
You're right.
Jackson. They beat
You're
Jackson
right.
State. They beat Jackson State in the Celebration Bowl. You know what I'm saying? And I mean, you got to realize Trey Oliver is a veteran coach. I mean, you got to realize many individuals thought at one point that instead of Coach Graves being a head coach, many people thought, like, aside from Chennis Berry, many people thought Chennis Berry, Mickey Joseph, but Trey Oliver was one of the front runners to be Southern University's next head coach, because Southern University's fan base, they always want these guys that came up, either played for Coach Richardson or coached under Coach Richardson, or just coached at Southern University in general. They want guys attached to Southern University. So that's why many people thought Trey Oliver, was going to end up being the head coach of Southern at one point. I mean, it didn't work out that way. And of course, Coach Oliver and Coach Graves, they, when it came to the opening press conference, it was some good banter between them. And, they were saying how, hey, when I was at Southern, he was at Grambling. I was at Grambling, he was at Southern. And, you know, they was constantly going against each other as assistant coaches, and now they get to meet head to head as head coaches. It's like, you know, there was always their rival schools, you know what I'm saying? And they always kind of bumped into each other and they ran in the same SWAC circles. So, you know, they clearly know each other personally, and you know, they were real cordial, real respectful towards each other. And they basically saying, hey, they looking for a good game and they expect it to be a classic, you know. Of course, some North Carolina Central fans think that North Carolina Central gonna blow Southern out, but I don't see it happen. I see Southern winning a close dog fight, you know.
Okay, we definitely gonna see, man. And with that note, Coach, let everybody know where they can meet you and see you, man.
Of course, you know, you could catch me, you know, recently people have been reaching out to me, you know, in terms of, you know, doing collaborations. You know, the plan this season is, you know, to, you know, for us to reach out and spread our wings and move up and through these HBCU streets in terms of collaborating with other content creators.
Yes, sir.
So, you know, if you're trying to reach out to me, you can reach out to me at Coach67sportstv at gmail.com. However, you can catch me at Coach67sportstv on all social media platforms. However, I am primarily here on YouTube at Coach 67 Sports TV. You know, a few nights ago, I started a new show called The Tailgate Party. You know, season 1, episode 1, the other night. So if you have not caught it already, go to my channel and catch it. Check it out. You know, The Tailgate Party, episode 1. You know, I go. You know, we broke it down to the bone bristle right here, but I also did a deep dive, an in-depth analysis, you know, strictly from a Southern University perspective. So if you didn't catch it already, go to my channel and check it out. You know what I'm saying? And definitely, you know, salute to our brother Brent Fox, and just salute to the entire LDBC family. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I just want everybody to know this show is pre-recorded. So if y'all put something in the when I upload it live, and y'all put something in the comment section, I don't answer it because it's pre-recorded, man. So I appreciate y'all always supporting those who have been supporting HBCU Fanatics from day one. Um, of course, you can see more of HBCU Fanatics now on Jared 011 Green, my channel. Thanks to Coach 67 Sports TV. Yeah, trying to push my channel, get more subs and likes, man, and views. So if you like what you're hearing, like and sub. If you don't like it. Let somebody who love HBCU football and share it with them. Don't be selfish, man. But Coach, this was another installment of HBCU Fanatics,
The
man.
Fanatics was in the build, Don. You dig?
Yes, sir. In the build, man. Y'all be blessed. We talk to you
Peace.
next Friday.
Peace.